Welcome. We are the Ministry of the Real Truth. And today we are going to go back to the very first civilizations in the archaeology of the origins via this book by Glenn Daniel. And by this we mean, as it's written on the inside of this book's dust jacket by Glenn Daniel, when we speak of the origins of civilization, we mean the origins of the first literate town dwellers. Some 5,000 years ago, Sumer, the earliest civilization so far known to man, took root in southern Mesopotamia. Sumer, the earliest civilization so far known to man, took root in southern Mesopotamia, not ancient Egypt, but that did follow. The Sumerians had city-states, specialized craftsmen, cooperative irrigation works, ceremonial centers, and a written language. In this book, Dr. Daniel carefully investigated the world's first 7 civilizations, showing what archaeology has revealed about their origins. These civilizations arose in the Old World, in Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley. Is that something to do with the Indians, the Brahmins, the Hindus, etc., and China, and in the New World in Mexico, Yucatan, and Peru, South America. Each of these 7 societies has left fragments of its existence for the archaeologists to study, and the layman, that's the ordinary Joe, everyday Joe, you and me, to ponder. Today, in Iran, Iraq, Palestine, Turkey, Russia, and Bulgaria, one can see Sumerian tells or signs, evidence of their influence. These mounds were formed over the centuries by the wearing down of clay buildings, each set on the remains of its predecessor. The towers contain Sumerian bricks, potsherds, and tablets displaying cuneiform, the world's oldest known writing. The winged griffin of Egyptian art inscribed sewers from the Indus Valley, advanced bronze metallurgy dating back to the very beginnings of Shang, China, the 1961 discovery of corn's wild ancestor in a Mexican cave, the remarkable jade objects of the Olmecs, emphasizing human figures with snarling jaguar-like features. Each offers fascinating clues to the way of life of these first civilizations and the relationships one to another. Dr. Daniel poses several questions. How, why, and where did barbarian societies make their leap forward into literate, town-dwelling communities? Were the 7 earliest civilizations linked in any... Look at the back jacket, back flap. Way. Where did the people of the first civilizations come from? Did the Vikings or other Europeans reach the continent of America long before Columbus discovered it? Dr. Daniel presents his own views and those of his contemporaries, probably the same in his field, showing how man and advanced archaeology have solved some of the world's greatest mysteries. A little bit about Glenn Daniel. He was a renowned British historian of archaeology, was a fellow and a director of studies in archaeology and anthropology at St. John's College, Cambridge, England. Editor of the journal Antiquity since 1958, he appeared frequently on radio and television and was the director and educational advisor of a British independent television company. Among Dr. Daniel's many books are 100 Years of Archaeology, The Idea of Prehistory, The Megalith Builders of Western Europe, and 2 books recently, or at that point or thereafter, published by Thomas Y. Crowell Company, Man Discovers His Past and the Origins and Growth of Archaeology. So let's have a look inside this book. Contents with illustrations. List of illustrations. The ziggurat of Ur after excavation and restoration and so forth. And there's more. Sources of illustrations. Preface. This book is based on 8 lectures given in the University of East Anglia, Norwich, in Michaelmas term of 1965 and repeated afterwards in the University of Cambridge. A summary version of them was broadcast in the third programme of the British Broadcasting Corporation in the spring of 1967, and the text of these summaries was published in The Listener. This course of lectures was the first series of public lectures given in the University of East Anglia, which started in 1961, and in planning it with the Vice-Chancellor, the author's friend and colleague, Frank Thistlethwaite, they decided that while they should try to attract as wide an audience as possible from both inside and outside the university, they should provide a course which demanded some thought and concentration on the part of the audience. It was all too easy, as the archaeological lecturer knows only too well, to produce a popular lecture with the aid of slides showing buried treasures, strange scientific techniques, history emerging from the ground. They wanted in this series to use the popularity of archaeology to direct the serious attention of people interested in man's past to this one central problem. What light can archaeology throw on the origins of civilizations? They did not know what reception they would have or receive. There might have been nobody there, no one turned up, or a large inquiring audience on the first night and nobody afterwards. In fact, all 8 lectures were given to a very large audience. The author hoped that in their present form they would reach that far wider audience of non-professional archaeologists and historians for whom they are intended. This is not a book for specialists. His professional colleagues will find mistakes of fact and interpretation in every line if they are so inclined. If that's what they're looking for, they'll find it. These lectures were given to non-specialists, to ordinary university students reading physics or geology or romance literature, to ordinary people, housewives, bus conductors, the man who drives the author around in a taxi in Norwich, in England, and the man who cooks some spring rolls and barbecued spare rib in a Chinese restaurant. But in his Norwich audiences, there were serious students anxious to take the matters he discussed further by conversation and by reading. And so after most of the lectures him and his friend held, seminars where points summarily mentioned and the lectures were expanded and differing views were talked about. The substance of most of the points which arose in this way are given in the seminar notes printed after the main text. For those who do not wish to plough through these detailed notes, he's appended a short list of books for further reading. The lectures were illustrated with lantern slides, and some of these illustrations are printed here in the plates within this book. Their intention is to illustrate the variety of person and performance among the first 7 civilizations of man, and the author says, let him emphasize the theme throughout is not the content and development of these civilizations, but the light archaeology throws on their origins and interrelations, and therefore on the general process of Cenoicism. In the preparation of this book, the author had been very glad to be able to continue the cooperation with Mr. Mr. H.A. Shelley, which went on for years in the pages of a magazine or book called Antiquity, probably a magazine, and many volumes in the Ancient Peoples and Places series, and he's thanking him for the 14 maps he drew from GD, May 1968, St. John's College, Cambridge. That's the author, right? Chapter 1, Savagery, Barbarism and Civilization. Just going to go through this real fast. In a recent article way back then, in the Spectator, Professor Stuart Piggott referred to archaeology as the science of rubbish. He was indicating that archaeology is the study of what material has been left behind, of the minor monuments at time which antiquates antiquities, and have an art to make dust of all things, have yet spared, of the dead bones which have quietly rested under the drums and tramplings of 3 conquests. To quote Sir Thomas Browne, you may remember Francis Bacon's definition of what archaeology was concerned with. Antiquities, he said, are history defaced, or some remnants of history which have casually escaped the shipwreck of time. It is with these remnants of history, this rubbish that has escaped the shipwreck of time, that this book is concerned. When the author saw the title of Professor Piggott's article, he was immediately reminded of the fine condemnation of archaeology once uttered by that most amusing American professor of anthropology, the late Ernest Alfred Houghton. Archaeology, he said, implies an interest in the obsolete paraphernalia of the past, which to the multitude stigmatizes its students as unregardful of the necessities of the present. The senile playboys of science rooting in the rubbish heaps of antiquity. He was one of those senile playboys, and he was asking This is the author talking here. Asking all to root in the rubbish heaps of antiquity with him. To dig archaeology together to find what light it throws on what the author regarded as one of the most important historical problems, the problem of the beginnings of the ancient civilizations of man. Their theme, then, was what archaeology, the study of the material remains of the human past, tells us about the origin of the civilized societies of antiquity, about the origin of the earliest and first civilized societies, that is to say, about the origins of civilization itself. And he gives more information there. Until Lubbock's time, man's history was conventionally divided into modern, medieval, and ancient. Lubbock defined the fourth division, that of prehistory, a kind of misnomer. It really means pre-written history. Writing is an achievement which came late in man's cultural development. The earliest surviving writing comes from Egypt and Mesopotamia. Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, right? And it's not earlier than 3000 BC. Writing, then, is a skill which is some 5,000 years old. Man may have come into existence perhaps in Africa, 1 to 1.5 million years ago. Homo sapiens was certainly in existence 30 to 40,000 years ago, and possibly much earlier. At a very conservative estimate, the prehistoric past of Homo sapiens, or human beings, is 10 times as long as written history, and the prehistoric past of man is the genus Homo, or genus man, very much longer, or genus being, very much longer. It is the final stages of the long preliterate past that concern the author here, or those here, and it is the testimony of the spade and not the testimony of the written word that suggests to all, or to them specifically, the views they should now take about the origins, or they should have taken about the origins of civilized societies. By the time writing had arrived and recorded history is upon us, civilized societies have already been born. There is a difficulty here, difficulty of method and approach. The historian proper is suspicious of the historian improper, if the author may so call the archaeologist who copes with the science of prehistoric rubbish, the scholar who deals with pots and pans and ruins and invents names for the people who created non-literate cultures. And on a aside, the archaeologist is suspicious of the broad approaches made by the historian and philosopher of history, and often retreats to his taxonomy and typology, and takes refuge in the minutiae of ancient material culture. This is why the problem we are studying with this book is so fascinating and so fraught with dangers and pitfalls, for it needs archaeological knowledge and a breadth of historical thinking. We may not achieve the union of these, but let's try. Our picture of man's remote past is derived from archaeology, with all its associated scientific disciplines such as, for example, human paleontology, geochronology, and the study of faunal and floral remains. The relative values of the material and literary sources for reconstructing the past of man vary from the beginnings to the present day. In prehistory, as we have said, as the author has said, archaeology is paramount. Indeed, prehistory is prehistoric archaeology. In ancient history, archaeology is of very great importance, and sometimes much of it is referred to as proto-history. We cannot solve or begin to see our way towards a solution of the fascinating problem of man's emergence from savagery through illiterate barbarism to literate civilization until and unless we appreciate what archaeology has to say. How much it has to say, and sometimes how little. We will speak of the limitations of archaeology later, or the author would speak of the limitations of archaeology later. The limitations of the written sources, on the other hand, are more obvious. They just do not exist before 3000 BC in the Near East. The antiquity of man's first civilizations is buried in the pre-literate past, and is what archaeology tells about the last stages of that pre-literate past as it emerges via proto-history into history that is our concern. The word civilization is by no means a very old one in the English language. Boswell reports that in 1772 he urged Dr. Johnson to insert the word in his dictionary, but the doctor declined. He preferred the older word civility, and this like the word urbanity, reflected the culture of the townsman in urbs or civitas, as distinct from that of the barbarian, the agricultural rustic. It was of course an invidious term, and here the author uses civilization and urbanization as objective and specific terms without the overtones which we associate with the words civility and urbanity. We do not suggest that the people of the first civilizations, the literate town dwellers of Ur and Mohenjo-Daro and Anyang, were necessarily civil or urbane, but they were literate and lived in towns and were the first people to do so in the long process of man's cultural and social evolution from the darkest savagery of the early Paleolithic. Remembering the book of Genesis, where Cain was ousted out of the Garden of Eden, went into the land of Nod, and he found himself a wife, had children, and he